As above, so below, as within, as without. Welcome to Wheel of Ezekiel Astrology Podcast, Episode 8, Astro-Psychology and Archetypes. I am your host, Ezekiel La Rosa. I am joined today by Luke Renda, astrologer and student of psychology and other related arts. I only recently became aware of Luke's work this year via the Unslaved podcast, where he just recently did an excellent series, 6-part series actually, with Michael and David over there. So this podcast, you could say, is sort of inspired by that series they did. So anyway, Luke, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Really glad to be here. Thanks for having me on. Following up on your last guest, Michael Suter. He's just an amazing astrologer. I love his work. And
yeah. I've noticed you and I seem to follow a lot of the same people, or at least are in network with them, like Fiona Edgar as well. I realized you were a student of hers. I didn't know that prior, but just came across an interview you did with her, which is fantastic. I just figured, we seem to have so many similar interests in common, particularly astrology, which is my favorite subject. So I figured I should definitely have you on for a chat and see, what kind of things we can discuss and maybe, explain a little bit better for people. I think there's just never enough of this material out there that's, more clarified to kind of counter all the pseudo astrology that's out all over the web. That's really just gives astrology a really bad reputation. So just to really bring it back down to tradition, to the roots of it all, and also make the connection to other things, other related subjects, like in this case, psychology and the archetypes, which for me, there's just an absolute marriage between the two that just maybe hasn't been fully recognized yet. I mean, on some level, of course, I know it has, but since, the time of Carl Jung, particularly, he was one of the pioneers of this, of at least exposing all this, putting it into some of his writing. Just this week, I was looking into that a little bit more, because wasn't super familiar with Jung's work, actually. Not extensively. I know a lot of people have really studied him really well, and could really break it down. So maybe that's a good starting point of sorts. Even though, actually, before we go into that, why don't you just give a brief introduction of yourself in terms of your studies with astrology and psychology? Like, about how many years or roughly have you been doing this? Whatever you want to say to introduce yourself to the audience here.
Yeah, for sure. I thought about inviting you onto my show, so you kind of beat me to it. So I noticed that we have a lot of similarities, and I thought, more astrology out there never hurts. So I appreciate you having me on, and following on with Fiona and Michael, who are just tremendous astrologers. I have so much respect for their work.
Interesting. Just curious. Sorry, before I'll let you carry on.
I'm
just curious. You said we have this connection here. Apparently, what are your three top, like sun, moon, rising? I'm just curious right now off the top. If you don't mind sharing that. Yeah. Do you mind sharing that?
I don't mind. I'm a Capricorn sun.
Okay.
And Cancer rising, Cancer moon.
Okay. Wow. Double Cancer. Okay. For myself, a Libra sun, an Aries moon, and a Leo rising. So I don't know how our charts would line up in a synastry. I just, whenever I meet people that have similar things in common, I'm always just curious about, the synastry between myself and another individual in terms of the points where there's really good contact. Maybe there's something with Mercury or Jupiter in our charts that seems to really connect well. But anyways, continue with what you're saying.
Yeah, so my journey in astrology, I started looking at it, more symbolically at first, about 10, 12 years ago. I was just, the signs, the planets, all of that type of stuff, just for more occult sort of reasons, my cult studies and things like that. And then there was a music festival on the small island that I live on, and an astrologer was there giving a presentation. A friend of mine, Martin Comtois, he has a Healer and Dreamer astrology on YouTube. I don't know if he's making videos anymore.
I actually came across that this week, and I was actually looking at your series that you did with him, also titled The Undiscovered Self with Jung.
Yeah, we
So
did that series probably around 2020, and I kind of compromised. I wanted to do it more in the slide version. Like I recently reprised it on Unslaved and Tech with my
right,
bestie.
I realized that's pretty much what that was. I was just kind of a
Yeah.
reprise in a
I
much
wanted
more.
to, yeah, that's the way I originally wanted to do it. But when you're working with other people, sometimes you have to compromise. And
Yeah, and no, it was good. I didn't quite finish it, but I mean, just a read through. But anyways, it's still exploring a very, very important work here. That
yeah,
was
and
very fascinating.
commentary is great. Yeah, he has a channel. He has some older videos. Like if we go to Uranus, Uranus, Saturn square, and Jupiter, Saturn stuff like. He does new moon, and full
Yeah,
moon videos, but there's some other long form stuff in there that's pretty good. But he
right,
was
right.
presenting, and he sort of brought up this Jungian version of astrology that I wasn't quite familiar with. I had
Mm-hmm.
studied Jung before. I didn't know how much he was into astrology. And so then I got a book by Liz Green called The Astrology of Fate, which was, for a first book, probably wouldn't recommend it because it's all about Pluto and fate. And she goes through a whole bunch of, it's a very deep book on astrology and psychology. And so I sort of worked from there backwards. And then, a few years later, I ended up meeting Martin, connecting with him, getting a reading done, almost to just to sort of pick and see what kind of style he had. You can, when you're self-taught, you don't have these teachers. So one way I found was get a reading from someone and I can pick up some techniques and things like that from him. And
Right.
then eventually, 3-4 years ago, I contacted Fiona because I was ready to start doing readings with people, and I was like, but I want to make sure I have all my I's dotted and my T's crossed. It's that sort of Capricornian. I really want to make sure I've got my foundation set up right, and
Right.
so I contacted her. We did, some of her basic astrology course, and I sort of flew through it really quickly. She said, you probably don't need to be doing this. Let's move on to readings. And I was like, no, let's go through the material first, and then we just ended up doing so many charts together, reading charts, and that's when really I found my way of having the chart will sort of reveal itself to you in a unique way. Every astrologer I feel like can see different things in the chart. Fiona is fantastic. She can see things in charts that are like, I'm like, how do you even know that, right? She's totally she's been doing it for a long, long time, right? So it's
Oh,
like
I know.
second
Yeah,
nature for her to see that type of stuff. She's got a real good psychic connection.
she absolutely does. Yeah, she did a reading for me actually on my last solar return, which you could say was the precursing event to even starting this podcast. Now, if I really think about it, and looking back at that, it just because what she revealed to me in that was pretty much the fact this is what I should be doing, which I kind of already had a hint at it, but it was just that final push and kind of like outer sign, like I was looking for a sign. That was it to like just take that leap to start doing this in this year. I've been studying my chart for a really long time, so I'm aware of a lot of my transits. I mean, on a regular basis, I'm checking a lot of things. I have my chart memorized. I have for many years, and then I really like to bring in the perfection houses, the annual perfections, which is a technique used in Hellenistic astrology. That I'm not. Are you aware of that? How
Uh,
that works?
I'm not really, no. My terminology being self-taught, that's the one thing I'm really lacking is like what a lot of the terms mean.
Sure.
I'm learning about mutual reception and
Yeah, I know that can be
simplicities and
tricky.
all that type of stuff.
That tricks me up sometimes too. Sometimes I read like a title on something and I'm like, what is this? I've never heard this before. And then I read it and then I realize, oh, okay, yeah, I know what this is. I just didn't realize that this was another title or another name for it, for whatever thing technique. But anyway, to not get too off track, it's something I think specifically to Hellenistic astrology that was just recently discovered in the early '90s with Project Hindsight. This is I started following Chris Brennan's book. He does the Astrology podcast. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So that's a pretty solid source of information, I feel. Um, and so anyway, and annual perfections is pretty much just it's a way of tracking your life, where each house corresponds to a different year of your life from the moment you're born. So from the day you're born, 0 years of age, just months till your first solar return, you turn a year old, you'll be in your first house. And then on the day you turn 1, you go into a second house perfection house year. Then, 2, you go into 3, the third house. And so pretty much the idea until you do a whole cycle around. The idea is if you observe this, and I've found it to be fairly accurate, is that each house perfection corresponding to each year of your life themes of that house will come up, and essentially it's like you're working those themes. It's perfecting. Essentially, that's the name is pretty literal there. So um, things having to do with whatever area of that life will have like an accent point, and therefore also that the planet that rules that sign, because I use whole sign, will also become the prominent ruler for that year. So this case,
Cool.
and this year I'm in a Cancer year, in my 12th house. So the moon is my ruler. So I'm constantly tracking the moon a lot more closely than I had previous years. Each lunation means a lot more now to me, and I feel it a little more acutely. Whereas maybe when you're like under a Saturn year that's much slower, there's not as much movement, of course, and Saturn will just be in the same sign, the entire time, unless it just happens to be a year that Saturn is transitioning signs. But anyway, all that to say, to not get too off topic, I found that really helpful, and in terms of finding my orientation of what I need to be doing each year of my life, essentially what honing in, focusing, it's like another tool that helps you work with your chart in a more specific way for each year of your life.
Yeah,
So
cool.
anyway, yeah, it's just a cool technique I like to
It's
share that.
always more depth, right? Progress charts, all that stuff. It's
Oh yeah, and then which I haven't looked into a ton, but yeah, I mean the progress moon and yeah, all those things that at some point I will probably address here, but not quite yet. Let's move into the subject today, since we got a little bit about your background, planets and archetypes. How do you see the link between that? I mean, I don't mean to put on your your YouTube channels. Feel the link, which it feels very appropriate because you seem to have this gift for linking a lot of different subjects and blend them in a really unique way. So, what's for you the link between astrology, psychology, and then the archetypes? Like, how would you break that down for, let's say, a beginner? Or just
well, because we say the zodiac and astronomy and all of that stuff, it's an unconscious process. That's what Jung says. The myths involved with the signs of the zodiac and the times of the year. Myth is an unconscious process, and astrology is based on mythology and vice versa, right? It comes back, so it's all an unconscious process that we're becoming aware of. And so
hmm
the planets, all the archetypes with the planets and the signs, it's very, myth is an unconscious, myth comes about unconsciously, and then we bring it up into consciousness, and it sort of is reflecting what's going on with the psyche. And so
hmm
again, just like psychology, which is chiefly concerned with unconscious processes, uh, astrology is a way of really being able to see that. So Jung would always have someone's chart when he was doing analysis.
hmm
You know, all for many years. He didn't really talk about it too much until his later days, but he would always have a chart, and then that chart would point to something, that otherwise would be harder to find in the person's personality.
Yeah, it's like
Whereas he can just look at the chart and see it rather than get the person to tell him their entire life story and
no,
all of this stuff.
it's like a secret map that really just reveals the truth right there, because people can give you a spin on their life from their perspective that they don't even realize is maybe inaccurate. Like people have false memories of things or ways of filtering reality in a way that isn't necessarily true. But a chart never lies. It's literally the map of a person's life that will tell you everything just straight up, exactly how it is. Granted, of course, there's maybe some bias and some kind of unique lens that an astrologer will see one thing maybe in with a certain slant, but for the most part it's pretty straightforward. So for a psychologist to have that, I would imagine, is a fantastic tool. It really helps give them a secret uh, it's just this angle on their psyche that the patient may not even be aware of themselves. So
Yeah, absolutely.
right. So
I have a quote I can read from Jung just to clarify if you want.
yes, please go ahead. Yeah.
This is one of his letters. There's a lot of stuff in his letters to other people, other astrologers, other psychologists. And this one starts, there are many instances of striking analogies between astrological constellations and psychological events.
Mm,
Astrology, like the collective unconscious, with which psychology is concerned, consists of symbolic configurations. The planets are the gods, symbols of the powers of the unconscious.
yep. Pretty much sums it all up right there. Right. Yeah, and I mean, and then talking about the collective, just because this is kind of an area where I feel a lot of astrologers, particularly more modern versus traditional, if you need to put them against each other, which I don't see a reason to, but there definitely is a distinction with how the outer planets are perceived in their role. And I feel that this particular key, I mean, the fact that even when the outer planets, each one was discovered, was very key to what was happening in history at that particular point in time. It's very very revealing. Um, they have their unique place more so with the collective than an individual, though certainly an individual having a very tight aspect, like let's say a conjunction to their sun or moon or rising to one of the outer planets will definitely bring that outer planet into prominence, and it will be expressed much more clearly than someone who doesn't. But anyway, so Uranus I see as being the collect well the individual of sorts. You could say it's kind of the archetype of the individual in a way because it has to do with liberation and individuality. It's and novel new ideas being very unique in its own way, right? Whereas Neptune has more to do with the collective unconscious, kind of what you were reading just now made me think of that. That's kind of the archive of all collective unconscious memory, perhaps in images, because Neptune has so much to do with the imagination and fantasy and dreams and things of that nature. And then Pluto is like that, being the outermost, essentially is the one that hones the reins of all of the planets. It is the absolute annihilator. It's the one that comes in and changes the rhythm of things. It, what was I going to say? Essentially, Pluto will set the tone for whatever era humanity is going through. In this case, it's pretty clear right now, being in Aquarius, that the Aquarian themes are coming through already pretty clear. And Pluto's only just entered, you know, late last year, uh, fully to stay. So, um, you know, more will be revealed. But of course, we can always look back to previous transits of when Pluto, that's the last time it was in Aquarius, and the things that came up there. That's usually the best way. I've heard you speak of this as well. That's kind of the best way to get a gauge on the outer planets that we haven't lived through a cycle of them being in the particular sign that they're in now. So um, let's see. I'm not sure I was going with this. Pretty much the collective. That's their place. So therefore, that this is a point that kind of bothers me, that with modern astrologers, is that they want to assign rulership. That was a huge
Mhm.
interjection that completely disrupted the very elegant scheme of things. Well, of rulerships, essentially, of how the zodiac actually functions seasonally. Just even the geometrics, the fact that each planet has two signs it rules, a masculine sign and feminine sign, and then the sun and moon each have their own, just one at the top. Leo and Cancer at the what would be the solstice point, right? So, and then breaking out, Mercury gets the next two because it's the fastest. It gets there soon. It's almost like it's first come first serve. Mercury's the quickest. It gets there, so therefore it gets Gemini and it gets Virgo. Then next comes Venus and gets Taurus and Libra. And then next would be Mars that gets Aries, Scorpio. Then Jupiter comes to get Sagittarius and Pisces. And then last, the slowest kind of wobbling to get there would be Saturn to get Capricorn and Aquarius. Very fitting. And in itself, of course, Capricorn seems to be, maybe for most people, modern astrology, as the clear sign for Saturn, and therefore Aquarius didn't seem to fit apparently for some of them, but that may just be because they haven't studied it sufficiently to see how Aquarius, in a sense, is kind of a polarity within Saturn itself, where Capricorn is kind of the status quo, um, and then Uranus is kind of the antithesis to that, but it's still a status quo, but it's just essentially revising the status quo to make a new one, essentially. But it's still about rules and fixtures and the way society, fixed ideas about how a society should work. It's fixed air. So it's still very Saturnian in that way, in a lot of other ways. I can see how Uranus has affinities to that, and you could say it has some kind of exaltation, or that it does well there, it expresses well there, but it doesn't rule it. Neither does Neptune rule Pluto. Neither does Neptune rule Pisces, nor Pluto Scorpio, because that's just not their place. It's not the rule. Only the personal planets can rule the zodiac signs because they're the ones that are there closest to the sun. The outer planets beyond the rings of Saturn don't really have anything to do with that type of rulership. They're out in what we can't even consciously perceive at all times. They're the ones that are they're essentially orchestrating the eras of time that they just move so slowly. The things that have to do with this vast ocean, Neptunian ocean of the subconscious that we're not even aware of. So how could that be something that rules a planet that's supposed to be something that's more personal? So they would actually move signs, because if let's say you had Neptune as your ruler, and it's in a sign for 11 to 12, 15 years maybe. There's not really much movement there. It doesn't really it doesn't really tell you much. Whereas if you have Mercury, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, whatever, any of the inner ones, there certainly is a lot more information that can be gained by having that as your ruler of your first house, let's say. But anyway, continue with whatever we were discussing. I kind of got us a little bit off track. I just really wanted to make that point, since you were talking about the collective unconscious.
Yeah, those are like
About,
generational planets, right?
Yeah, and that too, it marks generations, exactly.
Unless they're aspected right in that personal chart, then it's not as unique would be like the personal planets or the social planets, Jupiter and Saturn. And yeah, you got to use the traditional rulers for sure. They have their homes, they have their places. Neptune is at home in Pisces, but it's not no ruler.
Yeah,
you got to
exactly.
use those traditional.
Exactly. There certainly are affinities. I can definitely see that. I mean, even people that want to put Mars as the exalted planet in Leo, I can see why they would say that. There is a logic, because the sun is exalted in Aries, Mars is sign. Okay, that makes sense. I see Mars definitely does very well in Leo, but it doesn't really work well with the doctrine of exaltations. So basically, if Mars is in fall in Cancer, it's going to be an exaltation in the opposite sign, which would be Capricorn. It works like this for all the planets. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, but then also in fall in Capricorn, and vice versa. I don't want to go through all of them right now, but pretty much there's a real rationale for why each of the planet has an exaltation, fall, detriment, rulership, according to a lot of things that I have actually gone into this in previous episodes, and there's plenty of astrologers that have explained this well as well, for people if they need more clarity on how that all works. But anyway, let's move on now to talking maybe a little bit more about the mythology of sorts, and how that ties in, or maybe even seeing the signs in context to the mythologies, or maybe that's a separate thing. Because I see the signs as 12 archetypes of human consciousness, just compartmentalized in each of the houses they fall. It'll come across differently in a different chart per se, right? Like the 12th house is kind of the subconscious. It's the house that maybe we're not aware of as much. So whatever sign falls there, the nature of that sign and the planet that rules that sign will have something to say about things that aren't entirely conscious to oneself. So I don't know, maybe we want to talk a little bit about that, or just how you see myth in all this. I know you have some slides maybe you want to share that are relevant to this.
Yeah, like again, the myth, like you were bringing up Uranus earlier, that's like the myth of Prometheus, right? He steals fire from the gods. It's like that new technology, all that new and unforeseen things that can come out. The revolutionary, he's a transgressive sort of, he's stealing from the gods to help out humanity and all this type of stuff. And so going with these older myths, again, like Pluto and Neptune really have affinities with each other again, like Neptune is a lord of the deep, right? Whereas Pluto's like the lord of hell. And so they're both, very, very deep and powerful archetypes.
Right, but that psychologically, it translates exactly to it's the depths, right? Of course, but it's the depths of what? It's the depths of the collective psyche, right? Well, in a personal sense, sure, you could say that as well, but more so, like I was explaining earlier, it's the depths of just the whole reservoir of images and archetypes that are part of the entire human experience. So, which is amazing. And again, maybe we should try to, I know this is a difficult thing and you can't actually ever pin down, but maybe try to give a bit of a description or sort of explanation for people who aren't familiar with what an archetype is. We perhaps shouldn't take that for granted, that people have that kind of understanding. So how would you explain an archetype to begin with?
Well, archetypes are, theoretical for one, but they are symbol forming constructs that are never, that you don't actually see the actual archetype, you only will see the symbols that they put forth. And then that is hinting at, because the archetypes are moving and changing. And so, it's a symbol producing thing around a common sort of theme, right? And that's what archetypes are. You know, you can't really pin down an archetype because there's so myriad interpretations, but you can know it through its symbols.
Right, and an
That's
archetype is never only one thing as well. That's the other thing to as I was meditating upon this myself, realizing really just different hints. It's really just kind of an essence of that. You know, essentially an archetype. May have written some note down of something. It's kind of hard to put things into words, so sometimes when they come, it's good to kind of jot it down so you can remember it.
I did a presentation on Matt Presti's tech, the exploration of consciousness. It's called Mankind Possessed. And I was talking
Oh yeah.
about Jung's theory of possession. But in order to do that, I had to go through basic Jungian psychology and really deeply explain what archetypes are, because then I can explain how you can become possessed by one. But that's about a 3-hour podcast or so, 50 something slides. People are interested in Jungian psychology, I suggest to check it out because I go pretty deep into a lot of the basics.
Yeah. Okay. I'll definitely have to check that out. That sounds very interesting.
That's cool. Cool.
It's good just a brief note. Pretty much, it's planets as archetypes. They're basically, I think, like what you said, they're universal symbols that are not fixed concepts, but the essence of a thing. So let's say something like beauty can express in just a multitude of different ways. We experience it through our five senses, right? Either, you see something that's beautiful, and immediately you just recognize it as beautiful. There's nothing else that really has to happen. You just know. It's just, that's kind of the Venusian archetype of beauty coming through. Or you taste something and immediately you know you like it or you don't. At least usually you do. I mean, some things I guess are acquired taste that you can learn to like over time. But for the most part, um, you hear music, right? And immediately it moves you in a certain way. There's something beautiful about that, or you see a beautiful painting, or you see a rose, or whatever it may be. It's something that definitely it excites certain emotions and it evokes something deep inside you that you can't really explain. But that's you kind of coming into contact with an archetype, or in this case the archetype of beauty, let's say, that will be expressed in pretty much all of reality, wherever beauty shows up, right? That's a very basic example there. There's
Yeah.
some that are more subtle, right? Like I was thinking, I was kind of going through in terms of the planets being archetypes of different things, and then also each sign of the zodiac being an archetype of sorts. You could list
Yeah.
off endless things, and there's definitely overlaps where the ruler of a certain sign, that planet will also have a share in the expression of that archetype. Like let's say the sun, both with Leo and then also with Aries, will have something to do with the hero, or maybe with the king or the leader or the individual, sovereignty, things like that, coming into contact with that, which of course just shows up everywhere. Heroes, leaders that have had so many renditions and expressions of it.
That's,
And some archetypes are a blend of things too, right? So they're not necessarily one thing. They have sometimes even contradictory things. Like
yeah.
Mercury
So
is
if
a
you,
contradiction of things. Sorry,
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, like if we want to stick with like the signs of the zodiac,
Hmm.
they're more like, it's like an unconscious knowledge of the qualities of time. That's how Jung would describe it. We have an unconscious knowledge of experience that, around certain times of the year, things will have such and such a quality, basically how he
Sure.
describes it. And, again, like, Aries, that you were bringing up with Michael Suter, it's like that shoot coming out of
Birth,
the ground, right? And as we
individuation.
go around the zodiac, it's, again, we see that but we know it unconsciously first, and then we start to discover it consciously and start to, like, you imagine how many thousands of years people have been studying astrology to get all of these small details taken down. It's not like people are just making it up. It's through a lot of contemplation, through using a lot of intuition to
Hmm.
understand these qualities of time, as far as
Hmm.
just the signs of even the zodiac. And that's the difference between a sign and a constellation, right? Is that the signs of the zodiac are the ecliptic, where the sun moves through. There's a bunch of
Hmm.
other constellations that have archetypes associated with them as well, but the primary constellations, which we call the signs of the zodiac, are where the sun moves through every year, right? In the background
Exactly.
will be that
Which is
sign.
which is why the tropical zodiac is the zodiac that demarcates that. Exactly. It doesn't matter. The actual constellations don't have anything really to say about the story of the year as it's moving through, because it's not aligned perfectly anymore to the cardinal points, the solstices and equinoxes. So even if you took all the constellations, all the stars out of the sky, it wouldn't affect the tropical zodiac one bit, because the vernal equinox will always happen at March 20th, 21st, at that 0 degree Aries mark. And so will also the autumnal one at 0 degrees Libra around September 21st, September 22nd. And the same for the solstices, June 21st for the summer solstice, or December 21st for the winter solstice. These are the points that are demarcating the increase and decrease of light. So when the light gets the upper hand and rules, and then life can flourish, or then when the darkness at Libra, which is why Saturn is exalted in Libra, the darkness will then get the baton, and then the energy will then recede back down slowly into the root, where Saturn will then, as Michael Suter has talked about, Saturn guards the root of humanity essentially through the winter, and kind of just keeps it safe there until the energy could then finally come back up and into growth again in Aries. It's just this continual cycle. And again, the cycles themselves are an archetype. I mean, and then you can subdivide that into, cycles of time. I mean, that really, you could almost say that the zodiac is really the archetype of time. It is the first clock. It is the first way that human beings learned how to essentially plan their life accordingly to be able to survive. It was a very crucial. I think that the appreciation for astrology has been lost over time as technology and our whole life became very detached from Earth, because it used to be what we depended on. Humanity depended on knowing the cycles of time, and not getting that. You got that wrong, it meant your whole tribe died, probably. Especially if you lived in the northern climes. So there's that lack of appreciation because it's not as vital to our survival anymore, I feel. Astrology kind of became a relic of the past, and people kind of see it as a kind of a curiosity. Unfortunately, it's almost been reduced to just some kind of thing that people can't even really explain, that has to do with your personality. And it's kind of this cute thing that, oh yeah, my sun is this or that, it means I'm compatible with such and such person, which is such a watered down and really abhorrent basic understanding of astrology. It's not really even close to the origins of what it really was, and really the connotations that it had for people, right? So yeah, it was the first clock, and really is really the only clock. I mean,
the only legitimate clock.
Why else are there 12 numbers on a clock? You look at it, most people don't realize that that's just a zodiac. It's just been changed. Rather than having the 12 glyphs of the zodiac, we have the numbers 1 through 12, but it's still the 12 houses, and it's still the sunrise, sunset, all these things that people don't really appreciate anymore. Like I've been trying to connect a little bit more with where I'm living. I'm able to do this, to walk to a place that I'm able to actually see the sunsets. Sunrise, not as much, but I try to also make it to some sunrises. But just to appreciate that moment, that it used to be something that people used to do more, and used to connect them more to the sky, and kind of ground them here on Earth too. And it's kind of an art that I'm glad to see it is coming back, but it kind of became a bit of a not lost art, but it certainly has it lost its place, not by accident. But anyway, I maybe been going a little off track with that. Let's see.
The modern way, right, to dilute everything and to make everything smutty and cheap, right? So it's like a cheapening when we start getting into more of this new stuff, right? New age. It's like a thrift store, dollar store stuff, not the real art anymore.
No, it's like a hijacked version of astrology that isn't even astrology. It's just a corruption. It's absurd. But anyway, so what I'm trying to do here is bring back the real, rooted in the tradition, to have a real clear understanding of what it was the ancients practiced, and how we can apply that to our life now. Because essentially knowledge isn't power unless it's applied. So you can have an understanding of these things, but then how to take that and apply it to your life, unto self-knowledge, right? I always advocate know thyself, and you shall know the gods in the universe. Essentially, that's where it all begins. So starting by studying your own chart is really the place to go, and understanding your own archetypes in that, and how they fit in what house. So like for myself, I already shared Cancer is my 12th house. That happens to be the perfection house year I'm in. So I'm really looking into that. Cancer has a lot to do with the reservoirs of the past, your ancestry, where you come from, by virtue of being connected to, though it's not the same thing, but connected to the 4th house that has to do with ancestral lineage and your roots and your family and where you come from ultimately, so and that's the problem. Most people have been cut off from their roots and don't know who they are. It's only it's a very long process to recover that. That I have yet still to uncover much about my own past. But it's through astrology. It's aided me quite a bit, and having a bit of an understanding, and being able to then bring that back and try to remember that. Because that's really the crucial thing, is just to remember these things.
The ancestral, Fiona's doing more ancestral astrology. And
Yes.
but you can see it in the chart. Like, you can see, I had a client not too long ago who had it was like her great grandmother or something was somehow coming out of this chart, and it was really affecting her life. And we sort of dived into that. And upon original glance, you don't think, oh, this is my chart, right? But the sun is your father, the moon is your mother, but it's your sun and moon and how you're expressing that. And then as we can as you work your way through the chart, all of ancestral stuff can come up. Some people say past life stuff, but mostly I think it is ancestral, right? Like with your lineage, your bloodline, all that type of stuff. So, and there's themes that will emerge. Like, the one cool thing about Liz Green's book, The Astrology of Fate, is she does an entire family's charts, and you can see themes of how they're sort of passing the buck down to their ancestors, and it's so fascinating, right?
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I see that generationally, both in my family lineage, with myself, my father, my grandfather all share specific signs, and then I can see with my mother and her mother, and then my sister, kind of on the maternal side, having a lot more to do with those signs. Like, either the sun sign is the rising sign, or the moon sign is the ascendant, or some combination. I'm not going to go into right now, but you see certain predominant energies that are almost like recycled of sort, in a way you could say, through generations. Like, there's something to that, and then the nodes is another thing I was going to bring in. It also gives you a key into that, though I know maybe that's a more modern interpretation of the nodes, that the south node is your past life and the north node is where you're meant to go here. I think there's some truth to that. I always see the north node being, Rahu, being all about increase, where things are kind of coming in. It's almost like a funnel where a lot comes through. So there's definitely an accent point there. It's almost like a north star, kind of a compass point, a direction of that sign, that house is somewhere you need to aim at, something to do with those themes. Whereas the south node is maybe what's already very familiar to you, what you already know, kind of your strength, what's familiar to you. And then, so it's a place from there, and they work in pairs. So it's not to like disregard one and only focus on the other.
Yeah, there's that push pull, that balance between them, right?
It's decrease in a sense. So, which in a sense, maybe in order to accent the other one, there needs to be the decrease of one for the other to then be able to increase, in a sense. So wherever the south node is, maybe that's where you need to lessen and temper a little bit more, and then focus more on wherever the north node is. In terms of that access, whatever that happens to be in your natal chart. But all right, let's see. Did you have some slides you wanted to share? I mean, now would be a good time.
I've got some slides. I can try and figure out this. I can just read them if I can't figure out this screen share.
Sure. I mean, this is kind of an improvised conversation here. I mean, I had a general idea of what I wanted to discuss with you, but it's by no means fixed. If you have some interesting things to share, I'm all
there's
ears.
A couple quotes that can definitely help shed light on the psychological side from Jung's own mouth. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but here's one from his collected works, volume 4 on Freud. It's this motif of death and resurrection is found in countless myths all over the world. The meaning immediately lying behind it is astro-mythological. The sun is swallowed by the sea monster and is born again in the morning. Of course, the whole of astro-mythology is at bottom nothing but psychology, unconscious psychology, projected into the heavens, for myths never were and never are made consciously. They arise from man's unconscious, right? And so that's the connection with, psychology, astrology, mythology. They all are kind of going together. One is just an older version of psychology, really, before sort of refined a lot of these things. And so again, it's all concerned with the unconscious and what's going on like underneath, that underground stream. It's funny when I hear Michael Suter talk, I can literally like hear, that underground stream going. It's like that eighth house stuff, it's like, eighth house is like You know, it's like you're on the bridge, but it's like all the stuff that's like underneath the bridge that you don't know what's going on, but it's all part of that process, right? And you know, he really has that deep mythological connection to astrology. I really enjoyed that podcast. I listened to it last night.
Oh,
Before
great.
stayed up
Oh,
a little late, but
I'm
it
glad to
was
hear that. Yeah,
really good.
his book was very inspirational to me, and I started writing shortly after that. I'd always wanted to be a writer. I just didn't really know about what or how. You know, there's always that apprehension to just take that first leap. So started writing articles that I published.
So, yeah,
Just
your
started
writing
posting.
is actually very good. So I didn't
Oh,
know that you're just. I enjoy
thank,
reading your Substack. I'm Michael Suter's too as well. I just read that a couple of days ago, but both your
yeah.
writings are very very good. You know, I love writing too. I haven't done it in a long time, but maybe
Thank
I'll
you.
figure out the Substack thing. So yeah, you're doing great. I love reading your articles that you put out. So keep it
Well,
up.
I appreciate that. Yeah, yeah. It's Substack is phenomenal. It's really like a platform made kind of just for me. Like kind of like a dream come true. Like this is exactly what I needed to kind of encourage me along to get into this work. Very well catered to the purposes of what I'm trying to do here. Uh,
Awesome.
but yeah,
I'm
going back
gonna.
to that. Go ahead. Going back to that
Oh,
quote, essentially that you were saying, it really goes back to the Hermetic axiom. Just it's as above, so below, as within, as without. It's that projection of the within out to the without, and as above, the stars, not as causes, but just really as indicators of what's happening below. So that's
yeah,
another
exactly.
misconception that I've tried to clarify in my first episodes. The causal model only came about with Ptolemy, really around the 2nd century, I believe it was that they just kind of got adopted by astrologers and just never really questioned because he was trying to make astrology more compatible and more impressive to physicists. And granted, in a sense, he may have sort of saved astrology in a way from completely falling off by at least making it a little bit more reconcilable with the sciences at the time. Though, of course, it did derail it essentially because it took the whole notion of astrology as being just essentially an indicator, not a causal. That's where later then scientists or scientific people, because it's not really following the scientific method, can come back and say it's a pseudoscience because there's no empirical evidence that indicates that planets actually cause events down on Earth. They certainly indicate, and there certainly is some correlation between the planets and events on Earth. It's not this direct, like magic rays or something like that you can envision. Though certainly I would say the moon, it definitely has a tie to the oceans. I mean, that's, I think, pretty undeniable. And women particularly will probably attest that it has a lot to do with their cycle. And if they track that, I don't know. I can't really verify that for myself, but I would think that that's the case for most women, that they would be able to observe that, and how the moon's lunations have a pull over them and their emotions. I mean, we are like 80% water, so there is certainly something to be said with that. But going back to what I was saying with Ptolemy, that just kind of became an accepted idea, that was just how astrology had always been, but it's not the original way that astrology was conceived to really even work. I know Jung was trying to find out a way. He had this exploration of he wanted to understand how it worked, because being a man of academia, he was trying to be very careful about how he was presenting astrology or how he even talked about it, because of I can understand his position to not lose credibility, or
Yeah, he worked with the physicist Wolfgang Pauli for a time
mhm.
on synchronicity. And so this
Yeah,
whole theory of
synchronicity, right?
synchronicity, is really deep down. It's about, astrology, I think, and this
That's that's
correlation.
that's what I wanted to talk about actually next. If you would go into that a little more in terms of synchronicity, because that's a very fascinating phenomenon that I feel really fits really well with what we're already
Yeah,
saying.
it's like a meaningful coincidence is what
Hmm.
synchronicity is, right? And it's like,
So,
again, are these coincidences, right? These
hmm,
meaningful coincidences. It's like when you're following those synchronicities in your life, you say like, someone will pop up a thing or Substack will come up, or
yeah,
these little things that if you're following, these signs and these clues in your life, you're more connected to that, the myth that you're living, right? Because
the fact is,
everyone's living a myth, right? But
yeah.
no, go. What do you have to
No,
say?
I was just gonna say real quick. I don't want to interrupt you. Just a thought. The fact that there's an observer there, even because in order for it to be meaningful, obviously there has to be someone that observes it, that even takes note of it, and then the very fact that you took note of it and that it actually moves something in you, is what gives it meaning. I mean, essentially, it is the individual giving it meaning. It's because it may mean absolutely nothing to anybody else, and maybe nobody else even noticed it. So I mean, it's hard to know if synchronicities even happen or exist if there isn't anybody there to observe it. Kind of like they say, does a tree in the woods when it falls make a sound if no one's there to hear it, or something like that? I don't know. That's kind of off topic, but like I was reading or heard this famous story of Jung in a consultation with a woman who was very skeptical about. He's having a hard time kind of coming through to her, and so she was recalling this dream. You're probably familiar with the story where there was a golden scarab, right? And as she was relating this, he hears like a tapping on the window. So he goes over to see what it is. He's listening, and lo and behold, there was this scarab beetle there. That was, I guess, the only variety that lived in that part of Switzerland. So he opens the window and catches it, brings it inside, and just as she's finishing her story, he opens his hands and says to her, "And here's your scarab," which absolutely shocked her. And that incident correlating synchronistically, has to do with chronos, so synchronizing with time, the timing of it being so acute, just right on time, was really kind of the only way that you could say that this was going to come through to her. Something that extraordinary that there's no other way of really explaining, really. The fact that happened in that particular way, that particular time, um, you know, move something so profoundly inside her that from there he was able to then, actually work with her and kind of break the ice or whatever was blocking his communication to, a deeper part of her psyche, I guess, so to speak. But anyway, that's just an example.
Everyone needs that sort of scarab beetle knocking on the window moment to get them into it, right? Because you can try and explain all this stuff away until the cows come home. If someone isn't willing to take that leap and actually
it's the experience. That's what makes it real. There's no way. How else would you explain that to somebody? It's something that can't be understood unless you experience it. It's like certain dreams, certain lived experiences, or I don't know, working with psychedelics, or just some near-death experience, whatever it may be. There's no way to even recount that, and it's almost a sacred experience. I mean, for myself, anything I've had that's been that profound is not something I usually would share, and I would suggest that most people not share these things so readily unless it's the right timing and the right person, because it can actually kind of dilute that experience in a way if it's not treated with reverence. It's something you keep close to your soul, because it's essentially it's your daimon in a way, you could say, that's speaking to you directly in a very literal way, giving you something like that.
It's like trying to explain to someone who's deaf, what Mozart sounds like, or someone without a sense of smell what bread smells like. It's like you have to experience it to know exactly what we're talking about. So it's very personal. Again, everyone wants to make everything for everyone else, but it's actually deeply personal. And
absolutely,
that's what people in the collective and people who are very extroverted don't get, and they may never get. That's so it's not our job to convince people of this stuff. It's like, hey, if you're interested, here we are, but I'm not going to beat you over the head with this stuff either.
No, absolutely not.
The Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons or whoever, right?
What was that with the Mormons?
I said you can leave the the forcing it down people's throats to the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons or the scientists. They're cramming all this crap down your throat about science, and half of it ain't true.
Scientism, but yes, exactly. I get that. No, and again, this is where the transits come in, your personal transits, because they're so personal to your chart. There's the collective transits that sure have a collective impact on everyone on some level, but at the same time, depending on the configuration of your chart, you're going to feel it more acutely, with along with a lot of other things happening in your chart, because you have a unique placement for each planet, and each house with a different sign even. So it's going to hit, angular houses are going to be felt a lot more, or the first house, first, fourth, seventh, and 10th are usually the ones that are the most felt, I guess you could say, or at least let's say the 10th house is more visible because it has to do with public life and career, where the fourth house would be much more internal, maybe not as visible to the world, but you will definitely feel that more profoundly.
So you want to hear a quick story?
Yeah, please, by all means.
So, like when I got into astrology, it was right around my Saturn return, like when I actually started studying it in earnest. And
Me too.
then when I contacted Fiona to say, hey, I want to like deepen my studies and, really be more disciplined. I want to make sure I'm, crossing all my T's and dotting my I's. It was around my Saturn square Saturn. So 7.5 years later, exactly, that I'm really deepening more of my studies from when I started to, it's a Saturn square Saturn, right? So it was just, which is, Saturn is about, discipline, self-mastery, all that type of stuff, right? So it's just really fascinating that that's when I really decided to, make this a practice of mine, really get deep and into it. I started on that Saturn return, Saturn square Saturn, then you have Saturn opposite Saturn, and so
Right.
all the planets will have that cycle, right? It's like a new moon, full moon, but with each individual planet
Right.
in your own personal chart. Other people who had, Saturn in Aquarius or whatever, they're maybe having their Saturn return, right? I'm having my Saturn square, so.
Yeah, you said you're Saturn in Capricorn, right?
I got Saturn and Scorpio.
Oh,
Sun and
Scorpios.
Sun,
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah. But yeah, basically, yeah, around like 35 or so, yeah, everyone gets their first square. So I'm allowed to myself. I'm Saturn in Capricorn. So
okay.
every 7 years, it's quite a process. But yeah, that lunation cycle, as I've heard you say too before, but just for people, applies to all the planetary cycles. I mean, Saturn's is going to be much slower. Of course, the moon's happens in just like 28 days. So, they'll make the conjunction with the sun of the new moon, then the first quarter moon, the opposition's the full moon, and then the waning moon coming again to that 90-degree angle, the second square, just the third quarter, the balsamic phase, and then finally another conjunction, another new moon. So all the planets do this on a regular basis. Just of course, the timing is very different for each of them. But by looking at that, tracking that, you can see kind of where you're at in terms of well, the context of what houses are involved. So, if Saturn is squaring, let's say you're getting your Saturn natal Saturn square, your Saturn is like in your sixth house, let's say, and then what Saturn would be in like your ninth house, could something like that, right? Depending, it'll make that first square, and then you can kind of already expect and anticipate that certain things are going to be required of you from Saturn at that point, because the square is always that tense point where a decision is required to move forward. It's like you're trying to turn the sharp turn, because it's that sharp 90-degree angle, um, and action is required essentially to move things forward so they don't stagnate. So decisions mean having to cut away things too that don't serve. So you have to, by choosing something, you're also not choosing all the other options. So, which is oftentimes a very hard thing to do, but it's necessary in order to make progress and to continue, for Saturn to continue teaching you and instructing you the way he does. He gives you these tasks that you have to step up to, because if not, it's actually worse, and then you'll regret that I would say you'll regret that you didn't heed the calling the first time. Saturn can ask nicely the first time, then maybe the second or third time it's not so nice, and it just kind of happens regardless of whether you're ready for it or not. But, so for me, you get more wisdom. I feel that's why by the time you get to your second Saturn return, I'm anticipating, if you did well for your first one, usually by the second one it'll be a little bit maybe lighter, or at least you can go into it with all this wisdom already, and you're able to just manage that, navigate it with much more ease, than if the first one you didn't. It'll be kind of like a double duty where you'll get the lessons of the first one and the second one at the same time. So
well, that's why the retrogrades are important too. Saturn, you have your Saturn return, and then it'll like retrograde again,
right over that degree,
and then it'll go right back over again. So you almost are getting a couple
ironing out
chances
those wrinkles. You'll go back and forth regardless how many times he has to iron out that whatever was missed. Yeah, which is true of all retrogrades, but particularly, let's say, during your Saturn return, if that were to happen, yeah, or even teetering between two signs, going into one sign to kind of start something, but then going back to check up on you. It's like, I'm back. I'm making sure you're doing what I told you. I'm going to go back into the next time, but when I come back next time, you better have got that done. So, I give planets kind of a personality. It's kind of and I encourage people, I guess, to do this. Find a way to make it your own. It's your own stern fatherly figure maybe in you, but it's very helpful and very useful, especially if you're going to get stuff done I wouldn't be able to do this podcast if I didn't have a really tight relationship with Saturn, where there's just no nonsense. Essentially, it's Saturn and Capricorn. We're going to work and we're going to get things done. There's no other nonsense with that. So having some slack and some maybe grace for yourself is probably good. Maybe people like myself are a little bit too hard on themselves. Whereas then the opposite can also be true, where you don't push yourself enough, and then but it's the result of that, which isn't usually very productive.
Saturn's coming in there, and then with the Pluto. If you haven't learned your Saturn lessons, Pluto's gonna knock the house down, right? Saturn's like that building inspector. He's like checking these timbers. Oh, yeah, okay.
Checking the foundations.
Sure that stuff is this all good? And like, oh yeah, it's good. It's like, okay, because when fucking Pluto comes through here, so you better be prepared. So I like that relationship with all the different planets as well.
Yeah, but then also the opposite. I like Jupiter. I have a Jupiter exalted, so both Saturn and Jupiter are both very strong in my chart. So I can also flip the other polarity and really be in a very jovial side and see the optimistic. As much as I'm very Saturnian for myself, you can only speak from my own experiences. I'm also very Jupiterian. I do see in spite of all the chaos and the gloom that's all around us, I'm very optimistic, and I think that regardless of what the outer transits or the collective transits are, how they're manifesting in this realm, one can have an extraordinary life and actually experience much joy and much sense of purpose, but one has to actually create it for themselves. The way you work with that archetype, that's up to you. It's either it's going to run you, or you can actually just engage it straight up, stand up and meet it, and essentially work with it and guide that experience in a way. So it's almost like living your chart out, knowing your chart well enough that you can actually embody and express the planets as they are to their fullest, rather than I feel you perhaps there's just this major blind spot in a person's life that isn't aware of their chart. I don't mean this to sound condescending, but I really feel for people that don't have any knowledge of astrology or their chart, because it's such a tremendous tool that gives you such insight about yourself that you can just really synchronize your life with the map of your life, of where you're here to do, regardless of whether you have this knowledge or not. It's just helpful to have a map on a trail that you've never walked on before, that you don't know what turn is what. Less likely you'll get lost than if you just go off without one. So it's a very
the three fates, right? The weaver, the spinner, the cutter. One like Erd is in Norse mythology is like she has the knowledge of the past, right? And Berlandi, she's got the knowledge of what's happening now, and then Skuld has the the knowledge of the future, and like all of these things, Liz Green's book, The Astrology of Fate, she has, it's like a baby on the center of the astrology wheel with all the spinners and cutters there. It's an amazing image, and
I need to get that book. Okay.
I always think about that, because you can see the past, you can see what you're going through now, and then you can also look ahead to see what's coming in the future, difficulties that may be coming around, and
right, but it's not fixed. The idea is that it's weaving. It's like every decision you make is sort of a commitment, and then there's the I use this word as correctly as I can. There's the karma that comes with it, which is really just the fulfillment and manifestation of whatever actions you've done before. So it's almost like whatever momentum you put forward, that has to play out. Yeah, exactly. You reap what you sow. So essentially, that's what that is. It's so sure, you could say it's consequences, but that doesn't necessarily have a negative connotation. It's just
fate isn't like fixed. I always think about it more like a destiny thing. But, I've read charts of twins, before, and each twin is living out the chart completely differently. And I'm explaining it to the one person, and I'm like, is there other ways that this could be lived out? And I was like, you could express it in this way. And then as soon as I said it, I'm like, wow, that's exactly how your sister is living her life. It was just such a different way of living the chart, because that's what I'm more concerned with. Not with you have Mars in Aries or Mars in Pisces. I'm more concerned on how you're living that Mars, and that's really what is freeing about astrology. It's not like this fated thing. No, it's actually very freeing.
Absolutely. I see basically like a transit or like a collective transit or even a personal transit. Like, let's say we're having Venus retrograde now, that doesn't at all dictate that such and such events are going to happen. It gives you kind of the nature of the conditions of what could happen, like as to how it can go this way or it could go that way. It's kind of up to you how you work with it. It's like you're given a bunch of raw ingredients that you can make a lot of different meals with. It doesn't necessarily dictate you have to follow one recipe per se. You know, you can combine these things in a whole multitude of different ways and come up with a different thing. Season in a certain way, it'll have this flavor versus that flavor, right? But you're still having, you know, you're having a transit that essentially is giving you tools to work with, essentially, and you're the one who decides how it goes. So it's ultimately that's where kind of fate and free will really aren't polar opposites. They're actually working together. You decide your fate. You essentially you create your destiny as you go. It's like I see it as kind of walking across an invisible bridge, where there's like this is kind of where the faith part comes in, I guess, my Jupiterianness, where you just take another step, even if you can't empirically necessarily see it there. It's just you know it's there, and you're working with it. You're kind of building this bridge as you're walking across this precipice of sorts. You know, like the stones are all there, and you're just kind of building it as you're going. You can make any design you want with that, or you know, place the stones in different positions, I guess. But ultimately, you know, it's up to you. You know how you do it, or you know, you're gonna have to cross the bridge regardless. There is the momentum of the universe that's pushing you to go to this place, to go through these experiences, because that's how you grow and you learn. Otherwise, you just stagnate and die. So in a way, the transits are kind of what are keeping us alive and keeping keeping everything fresh from stagnating. Because otherwise, we would never grow. We would never have that thing that pushes us into doing things that we're maybe apprehensive about. Like for myself, just after my last solar return, I probably wouldn't have started this podcast, or I don't know when it would have or not, but it's less likely, you know, had I not had maybe that reading with Fiona and just kind of felt that impulse there. And that was also shortly after the last eclipse in Libra as well, which is also very personal for myself, being a Libra sun. So see these little things like that, like where maybe a Libra eclipse isn't as going to affect someone, or isn't going to indicate something to someone in such an acute way as, let's say, you know, like myself in this case. You know, it's much more personal. So that's the other thing. When you making that distinction between the personal transits and the collective transits, that you know that they're not, they're mismatched oftentimes. Like there's not it's not dictated to go one way or another. It's very subjective as much as it's also objective. You know, again, all paradoxes can be reconciled on some level. You know, so I always marry in the Hermetic principles in with, you know, astrology and all psychology. All of these things are all saying the same thing. It's essentially, like you were saying earlier, was psychology is kind of just a new form of astrology in a way. And then, you know, synchronicity is another way of you know, observing
You know, I like new terminology.
Things from the deep reservoirs of one's memories, or in some cases even the collective psyche. Like I know Jung had a dream prior to World War I. I heard, where he saw like this flood. There was a blood coming up all the way up to the Alps, and then it stopped. And then, you know, he thought it was something having to do only with him, and then maybe he was going insane. And then shortly after World War I broke out, and then, you know, Switzerland was neutral, he began to realize, oh, okay, maybe it's not really about me. I was seeing something. I tapped into the collective consciousness. Essentially, like that personal experience had repercussions for all of humanity, or essentially he was seeing something that wasn't just pertinent to him. It was something much broader.
Patients in their dreams as well. A lot of those patients in their dreams as well around that time, there was a lot of like foreboding.
Right, but he was in a unique position to actually even become aware of that, which is what's so fascinating, that he had that kind of mind, that he was able to grasp that, pick up on it, and study it. You know, and then, you know, look at that, how many, like almost 100 years later, you know, we still have his works. We can read about this and still see how, you know, he transmitted something, or at least started something to humanity, you know, being a pioneer that is so valuable, really, that I hope to learn more about, and maybe in the future we can do a follow-up to this, because we're kind of out of time now. But I know you had a lot more slides, so maybe in the future we want to do something else, more on Jung specifically. Even, I mean, I'd be down perhaps to do that.
Sounds good.
Yeah, man. Well, thanks for coming on today. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, no worries. I really enjoyed talking to you too. Yeah, we can do something in the future. Just hit me up. I'm happy to chat anytime.
Yeah, man. Great. Well, for everybody, Luke has a channel on YouTube called Feel the Link, where he's got some pretty good videos. I've only just recently come across it, so I haven't worked my way through it much. But like the series on the end.
I'm going to put some new stuff up because I haven't done anything in the last couple of years.
Okay.
So.
Maybe a Substack
eventually I'll get around to it. Yeah, Substack too. I'm going to figure out these programs. You know, my tech savviness is on the low end of the scale, so I'm gonna figure all that
Yeah.
stuff out. I'm sure it's possible. It's easy.
Yeah. Well, we're
So
just
let's
getting
do it.
started this year. So, I mean, 2025's got so much. I mean, I'm very optimistic about it for myself personally. I think it's going to be a great year. I think right now where we're at with the current transits is really just setting the stage for what's going to happen. Venus retrograde, once that's over, then Mercury retrograde, and then moving forward into the late spring and summer, I think really things are gonna be taken to the next level. And I, for myself, I'm really excited about that. I mean, Jupiter
Um,
going back into Cancer, for myself
mm,
being my Jupiter return, I'm pretty optimistic about that. So,
yeah, and
uh,
I do every year. I look at all the new moon, full moon eclipses for the whole year,
hmm
and then you can kind of get the feel of the whole year, and then you can go through it month by month or whatever. It's just that's sort of a practice I do. So. But
yeah, no,
maybe you can come on my channel and we can talk in maybe more basic astrology. I've had a lot of people asking me about real basic astrology questions on there. So
oh,
perhaps,
okay,
yeah,
all right,
that
man.
was
Well, we'll be
something.
we'll be, we'll be in touch. That'd be great. All right, well,
Sounds good.
very good. Well, again, thank you everyone for listening to Wheel of Ezekiel Astrology podcast. Please consider supporting if you find this value, any amount. Really, there's a link below that you can check out. And as always, as above, so below, as within, as without.